Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kristen, and today I would like to talk about my experiences from the June 2024 30 Inks 30 Days challenge. So here is the overview of all of the inks that I used for the month of June. I participated in 30 Inks 30 Days in April of this year, and again this month because I still have so many ink samples. During the month of April, I went from owning 243 ink samples down to 210 ink samples, and that was a success for me. I was expecting the number to increase this month because of the kindness of so many people in the fountain pen community and my own curiosity about Pilot Iroshizuku inks. So I bought 24 additional ink samples all in one go. So this month was more about exploring all Pilot Iroshizuku inks plus a few extra ones, so that more than actually decreasing the number of ink samples in my collection. So let's take a look at each of these pairings by day. This is Dieman Fortune's Gold, and I forgot that I had already used this one maybe a couple months ago. And so the ink that I was supposed to be writing with was Dieman Bucks Fizz. So day one was actually two separate inks, and they were both shimmery inks. You can see that in the reflection of the light. There was plenty of shimmer. There's more shimmer in Dieman Fortune's Gold than there is in the writing sample for Dieman Bucks Fizz. I didn't really enjoy either one very much. They were reliable combos. So this one was with the Lamy Safari with a long knife nib, and this one was with the Esterbrook Este Mimosa. So this was a drier ink, but it works so very well with the Esterbrook Journaler nib. I did enjoy it, but it still overall felt like a dry pen and ink combination just because of the ink itself. So day two was Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-ryoku. It was a nice bright bold green ink color that was super juicy in my Pilot Custom 823 Amber with a broad nib. This one was just so glassy smooth that I was almost really messy with my handwriting, but it was still very, very enjoyable, even though I struggled a bit with keeping it in control. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyu-syogun in my Pilot Custom 74 Smoky Black with a fine nib. This was really nice to use. It was a very reliable, cool gray ink. I enjoyed every bit of that writing sample. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Ajisai in my Lamy Safari Pink Cliff with a medium nib. It matches really well with the Pink Cliff fountain pen, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-kai in my Leonardo Momento Zero Nuvola with a medium nib. This was a nice, juicy, very smooth, very enjoyable writing experience. This is Jacobin Poussière de Lune in my Visconti Mirage Mythos with a fine nib. This was a struggle. This is a super dry ink in one of my most wet writing fountain pens, and I was so frustrated with this that I went ham with the Van Ness Pens White Lightning, and this was the result. I was going to do another writing sample, but then I realized that I had put too much White Lightning in that ink. So this ink is actually just going to be delegated to dip nibs only, which it actually performs really well with the dip nib. This is Van Dieman's Kitten Paws in my Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini Zine Pink with a medium fine nib. This is a light color, but it's one of my favorite shades of pink. I had just resolved to not liking the shade of pink when it comes to fountain pen inks, but my experience with this one has been a very, very enjoyable experience. I just wish that it was only slightly deeper in color, and I don't want to just add black to it because that would probably change the look of this pink. Yeah, it's really nice. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Amairo in my Sailor 1911 Large Stormy Sea with a fine nib. It's a very bright blue ink, but it was a wonderful writing experience in this fountain pen. Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyugaki in my Pilot Vanishing Point Black Matte with an extra fine nib was a very enjoyable experience. I love the crisp lines that I can get with this Japanese extra fine nib. This was one of the fountain pens that I actually reached for more than others just because of its utility. It was quick to open, you know, just click the thing and it's open. And I was ready to go, ready to write, ready to take a quick note. This was one of my most used fountain pen and ink combinations for the month. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Murasaki-shikibu in my Franklin Christoph Model 45 in lavender This has a fine cursive italic nib. It was a really nice writing experience. I love my cursive italic nibs. I love my sig nibs, but this one in particular was really, really nice. It was a very nice, pleasant writing experience. I wish that this was two separate inks. The color of this ink while wet is a bit darker, a bit more bold. And then once it dries down to this soft lavender colored ink. So I wish I also had that deeper purple as well. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Asagao in my Lamy 2000 black with an extra fine nib. I'm not sure what to think about this pen and ink pairing. Well, I know what I think about this pen and ink pairing. This pairing makes me feel like I'm using someone else's pen because it's a very understated fountain pen with a very standard blue ink, and it just seems like a combination that I would not choose for myself. But it was nice to at least have this experience once in my lifetime, I guess. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Hotarui in my Sailor 1911 large with a medium nib. This was a very pleasant writing experience, at least the feel of this nib on paper. This was a really nice, really juicy, really smooth writing combination, but the ink is just so bright. It's so light. I love the shade of this green color, but it is too light for me to really read it. Like even right now, I don't want to read this text, but I love looking at the color of this ink. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Kosumosu in my Binu Euphoria Pink Champagne with a broad nib. This was one of my favorite writing experiences of the month. I really love the shade of pink. It's nice and warm, but it also has like a good amount of shading. And that broad nib is just so juicy and fun. I love to write big and free with these broader nibs. Here is Dieman Rainbow's End. This was one of the ink vent colors, and it is a shimmer ink. It might even be one of those chameleon inks, but this felt like a drier writing experience, especially following after this juicy combination right here. This just feels dry by comparison. This wasn't a dry combination per se, because my Shown Design Pocket 6 with a perspective nib, that is a juicy writing fountain pen. And to have that pen use Diamond Rainbow's End and it still write reliably well, even with the shimmer, it was a really nice writing experience. It just wasn't as pleasant as I've been experiencing with all of these other Iroshizuku inks. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Kujaku. This was inked up in my Twisby Eco Cafe in bronze with a broad nib. I didn't write broad, but this is a broad nib, and it was nice. It was reliable. I wish it was juicier. So if I can show you, this right here was super wet, super juicy. But this was like right when I had first inked up the pen. This was the first thing that I had done, and the feed was flooded with ink. That is what I like. When it comes to colors like this, I love seeing that super deep teal color with just a hint of that red sheen on there. The feed regulated itself throughout the writing sample, and so you could see a little bit more shading down here at the bottom, but I really just enjoyed that deep teal color up here more. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Momiji in my Kaweco Classic Sport Transparent Gold with a medium nib. This was a pleasant enough writing experience. I really loved the fountain pens that I used this month. I was very intentional about including Kaweco fountain pens. In my experience, Kaweco fountain pens are a little bit problematic. They are drier writing fountain pens, and I knew that Iroshizuku inks were more wet inks. So putting these two together was a really pleasant experience. It was very nice, very smooth. This is not one of my favorite colors, but it was a really, really nice writing experience. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Sioro in my Platinum 3776 Century with a soft, fine nib. This was a pleasant enough experience. I've had juicier writing experiences with this fountain pen, especially with Diamond Poinsettia. But this pen and ink pairing has proven to me that Pilot Iroshizuku inks will at least work with my soft fine nib on this platinum fountain pen. So this has given me hope that I will have more than just one option for this fountain pen. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-ryoku in my Pilot Kakuno Translucent Aqua with a medium nib. This is a nice color, but I feel like I want it to look a little bit more sharp than it appears right now. I would love to see this in a finer nib, like a Japanese fine or even an extra fine Japanese nib. Right now it just looks a bit too soft, and I would love to see it look a little bit more crisp. But the writing experience was really good. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Chikurin And it was inked up in my Franklin Christoph Model 46 with an extra fine SIG nib. This was very crisp, very clean. I did enjoy the writing experience. It was a bit sharper, especially after something like this that was like juicy and smooth and everything. This had a bit more edge to it because it was a SIG nib, but it was really nice. It was a pleasant experience. This wasn't one of the wetter inks, pen and ink combinations that I've had, but it was still very enjoyable. It's a very soft green. Here is Jacobin Ombre de Birmanie. It's a beautiful color, but it is a dry ink. And even in my Aurora fountain pen, which is typically a wetter writing fountain pen, it still felt like a struggle. Like I was pulling teeth trying to get this ink to touch and make contact with the page. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Yamaguri in my Scribble Field with a fine flex nib. This was the absolute opposite of my experience from day 20. Day 21, this was a wet pen with a wet ink, and it was just... I was afraid that I would have so many puddles on this page. There were pools of ink in the shapes of letters. I think I remember that happening. And then there were a few areas where the ink actually feathered on this Tomoe River paper. But the color is beautiful, and I would love to see this one. Oh, I would love to see this one in some Japanese fine nibs and extra fine nibs. I think that would be a really lovely pairing. This could actually work in my soft fine nib from day 17. I think that would be really nice to go in my Platinum 3776 Century with a soft fine nib. That might be excellent in that pen. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Tsutsuji in my Kaweco Collection Iridescent Pearl with a fine nib. This was also not one of my favorites, but the writing experience was perfect. I really enjoyed writing with this pen every time I picked it up. It was such an enjoyable experience. And I think because of the fact that I had already experienced Pilot Iroshizuku Kosumosu before this one, I think that's the reason why I'm not falling in love with this ink. Because this is a cooler version. This is a cooler ink. Where are you, Kosumosu? I really love this warmer version of Kosumosu versus the Tsutsuji. This is a little bit more purple, reddish purple to me. I love the gold sheen on this ink though. That's really nice. I like how it warms up the ink, but I prefer the actual warmth in the ink of Kosumosu. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Konpeki in my Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini. It has a broad nib that was ground to Naginata Togi by Mr. Mike Masayama. This ink is not bad. It's not one of my favorite blue inks, but it performed beautifully, and I loved how it looks coming from the Naginata Togi nib. Nice blue ink. This is Pilot Iroshizuku Tsukiyo in my Kaweco AL Sport Gray Anthracite. This was one of the more disappointing experiences of the month because I know that there is awesome potential with this ink. This ink is wet. There were only 3 drops, but it was ready to spread all over the page. But coming from this pen, it looks like it's a dry ink, but it's not a dry ink based on the way that this behaves on this splatter, on this ink splatter, and the way that it behaved during my swatching session. I know this is a wet ink, but looking at it right here, the fault lies in the Kaweco fountain pen nib. The tines are super duper tight on this Kaweco fountain pen, and I will need to take a look at that pen to at least adjust the nib or replace it altogether, because I'm very disappointed because I know that this could have been an excellent writing experience in another fountain pen. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Yuyake in my Franklin Christoph Model 3 Lemon Yellow Amber Swirl with a medium SIG nib. This was a really nice writing experience as well. So if I look at these two swatches together, they are so very similar. This is Fuyugaki, this is Yuyake. In comparison to Yuyake, Fuyugaki is the more red ink, and it actually looks like a very warm red ink coming from a Japanese extra fine nib with a little bit more ink on the page being spread out by this medium SIG nib. This is unmistakably orange, and it is more of a peachy or a coral shade of orange rather than the more yellow shade of orange. And I think that's why it appeals to me still, but I do prefer this one. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that this was in a Japanese extra fine nib where there are a lot of crisp lines and everything. I don't know, but this particular experience and the color here And the way that it looks and the way that I feel going back and reading this writing sample, I really enjoyed this one more than I enjoy Yuyake coming from this medium sig nib. Here is Van Diemen's Russian Blue in the Kara's Vertex fountain pen. This is a really nice ink. I love the colors that I see in this swatch. It's like a moody blue-gray ink color. And so it looks, if I cover this up, this basically looks like a gray ink. A blue-gray ink. But then you have this swatch down here that just gives it a little bit more context, and so you see a little more of that character here. I do remember seeing that Van Diemen's Russian Blue is probably a dry ink, so I want you to beware that this might feel dry in certain fountain pens. But in the extra fine titanium nib that I have on this Kara's Vertex fountain pen, it was a perfect combination. It actually felt almost a little bit wet. So that was a really pleasant writing experience on day 26. On day 27, I used Pilot Iroshizuku Kirisame in my Platinum 3776 silhouette with a medium nib. This is a nice warm gray ink. It matched perfectly with the warm gray in the fountain pen, and it was such a smooth writing experience. I love the look and the feel of the Platinum medium nib. Let me take a look at the other gray ink from the Iroshizuku line. So we take a look at these two side by side. The cool gray is on the left and this is the warm gray on the right. I enjoy both, but I'm starting to lean more towards this warm gray, especially the way that it looks in my warmer looking fountain pens. I love the way that this looked with the warm gray and the gold trim. Here is Pilot Iroshizuku Yama-budo in my Benu Talisman True Unicorn with a medium nib. This ink is beautiful. I love that golden sheen on here, and I wish I had a better experience, at least with the nib of this fountain pen. The nib on this pen has misaligned tines, and it was interfering with the potential of this ink. This is a beautiful pen and ink pairing. I just wish that the nib was better, because there were a few hard starts, a few issues that I had, like up right there and a couple other places in the writing sample as well, where I was trying to rotate the pen so that I could get the best possible writing experience, best possible contact with the nib to paper, so that I could have a smooth ink flow. Other than that, it was a great writing experience. I know that this is an excellent ink, and I would love to try it in a different pen, or at least have the nib tuned and then come back and have that excellent writing experience. Pilot Iroshizuku Take-sumi in my vintage Pilot Maki fountain pen with a script nib. This pairing was perfection. This was one of the best experiences that I've had this month, and I was not expecting to have one of my favorite experiences be with a black ink. I love color. I really do. I love color, especially warm colors and muddy colors. I really enjoy those. But this right here is just your straightforward, no nonsense black ink with the best feeling of lubrication and wetness in this ink. Like, there is nothing else to focus on except the feel of the pen against the paper. And that's excellent. This was so good. And I really enjoyed the very subtle sheen on this ink as well. It was not overwhelming or overpowering like the sheen of some black inks. Like I have this inked up with Leonardo, I think Leonardo's black ink, the one that came with this fountain pen. And one thing that bothers me about that ink is the fact that it has a black sheen on it. And so it just looks like there's a halo, or what is it? Blurred edges. So yeah, so the sheen on that ink makes it look like the edges aren't as crisp. And with this one, I get super crisp lines. There's nothing that just makes it look like it's messy or anything like that. I really enjoyed this black ink. I like how it looks and I like how it feels. And day 30 is Pilot Iroshizuku Hana Ikara in my Opus 88 Mini with an extra fine nib. I was a little bit worried at the beginning that this was going to be a disaster because it's a very pale ink and a very fine nib, but it was a perfect pairing with the theme of the pen and the ink, as well as the performance of the pen with the ink itself. I really enjoyed it. It is a bit light for me. I can still read it, but it's right there at the border of discomfort. I really do enjoy it, but I would love to see this just a little bit deeper. I saw a comment on this video where someone added a couple drops of Kosumosu to darken up, to deepen this color, Hana Ikada, And I think I would try something like that, to just add a drop of this to a good amount of Hana Ikara, just to make it a little bit more legible. I don't want to change this color to make it a bit cooler like that one, but I do love the shade of this ink. It is just, oh, it's so good. So if you have some suggestions or recommendations of an ink that is similar to this, but just a tad bit deeper in color, a little bit more legible, let me know. That's all of the inks. So my biggest disappointments of the month, or struggle bus combos, were from day one, Dieman Bucks Fizz and Dieman Fortune's Gold. They were a little bit dry and the shimmer wasn't really consistent throughout the entire writing samples. They weren't really pleasant experiences for me. Now, day 6, Jacobin Poussière de Lune. This was a super duper dry ink. It's a beautiful color, but the writing experience, I had so much trouble trying to get this ink to make contact with the paper. And so that was a really big disappointment because I love the color, but I can't use the color. Pilot Iroshizuku Hotarubi on day 12 is a beautiful ink color, but it is not very legible. So if I can find that one in a deeper color, I would really be happy. You know, I would love to try that as well. Dieman Rainbow's End is a gorgeous ink color, but it's more trouble than it's worth. I would love to have this ink color, but without the shimmer. Day 20, Jacobin Ombre de Birmanie is a beautiful color, but it is too dry. So I would need to put some white lightning in this ink. And I'm going to be much more careful with this ink than I was with Poussière de Lune, because I really want this one to remain usable for me. Pilot Iroshizuku Yamaguri is a gorgeous brown ink. I actually enjoyed it. I love the color of this ink more than I thought that I would, but I really need to put this one in a drier fountain pen. I would love to see this ink in a Kaweco or a Platinum or even a Hongdian fountain pen. I think those are some of my driest writing fountain pens, and so that ink would probably work in one of those or many of those. Iroshizuku Tsukiyo in my Kaweco fountain pen. It was not the fault of this ink, it was actually the fault of the nib, so I would love to see this one in a different pen. The surprises of the month were Van Diemen's Kitten Paws and day 11, Pilot Iroshizuku Asagao. Kitten Paws, I had discovered that it is one of my favorite pink inks. So the first time I swatched this ink was during an ink flight unboxing, and it just, I don't know, it threw me. I was thrown off guard because sometimes I didn't like it and other times I really liked it. And once I inked it up in a pen, I absolutely loved it. So that was a biggest surprise for me. Pilot Iroshizuku Asagao was also surprising, but in a different way. It made me feel like my pen didn't belong to me. This pairing with my Lamy 2000 felt very impersonal, because it's not really a pairing that I would typically pursue. I love warmth in the colors of the inks, warmth in the colors of my fountain pens. And so this was a cool color along with a black ink and silver trim. And so it just didn't feel like it was mine, if that makes any sense. Just like last month, I also have my top 10 fountain pen and ink pairings in this case. And before I get to those, I want to show you the pen and ink pairings that were runners up. They just missed out on the top 10 pen and ink pairings. Day 3, Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyu-syogun was really nice. It was a match made in heaven, basically. The pen and ink looked like they were made for each other. But this pairing just got outshined by 10 other fountain pens. Day 16, Pilot Iroshizuku Momiji was really nice, very smooth. I'm just not in love with the color of the ink. Day 17, Pilot Iroshizuku Shioro is a very nice color, but I would love to see this one in a different pen. Day 18, Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-ryoku is a nice color, but I would love to see this one in a different pen, a finer nib. Day 30, Pilot Iroshizuku Hana Ikara is gorgeous, but it's just a tad too light. So I would actually want to try this one in a broader nib, or I would love to deepen it up with a drop or two of Pilot Iroshizuku Kosumosu. Now let's take a look at my top 10 pen and ink pairings for the month. So yes, I guess we'll go from the bottom. In 10th place is Pilot Iroshizuku Yama-budo in my Binu Talisman True Unicorn with a medium nib. It was gorgeous, but it's in 10th place because of the nib tine alignment issue. Number 9 is Van Dieman's Kitten Paws from day 7 in my Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini Zine Pink with a medium fine nib. It's a gorgeous ink, just a tad too light, and the nib, this medium fine nib, is not my favorite nib size on my Sailor fountain pens. In 8th place is Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyugaki from day 9 in my Pilot Vanishing Point Matte Black with an extra fine nib. Sometimes I just did not enjoy this pen and ink pairing combination, specifically on Iroful paper. There was just a little bit too much drag, and so the pen actually gets caught sometimes on the paper because there's so much drag on Iroful, at least with this nib. But it was pleasant everywhere else on Tomoe River paper, on other papers. This was beautiful, and it, like I said before, this was one of the pens that I grabbed most often during the month of June and a little bit into July as well. In 7th place is Van Dieman's Russian Blue from day 26. This is the Keras Vertex small batch fountain pen with the extra fine titanium nib. It's a very, very beautiful feedback experience. Some people do not enjoy the feedback of titanium nibs. I would encourage you to try one out before you actually purchase one if you are sensitive to certain types of feedback. It was very strange to me at first, but I absolutely adore the feedback on this nib, and the color, just the ink pairing was just so good. It was so good. 6th place goes to Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-ryoku day 2. This was in the Pilot Custom A23 Amber with a broad nib. It was just so wild and free, very slippery, very little feedback to this pen and ink combo, but I really enjoyed using that. In 5th place is my Platinum Nagasawa Silhouette with a medium nib, inked up with Pilot Iroshizuku Kirk-same from day 27. I know during April's 30 Inks 30 Days, this was in 1st place, but this month it's in the 5th place because I really enjoy all 4 of these fountain pens, just a little bit more than this one. But I am glad to see that it's in the top 5 again. Number 4 goes to Pilot Iroshizuku Shin-kai from day 5 in my Leonardo Momento Zero Nuvola with a medium nib. I just love this pen and ink pairing. It's so smooth, and I love the bouncy gold nib on this Leonardo fountain pen. 3rd place goes to the Benny Euphoria Pink Champagne with a broad nib, and it has Pilot Iroshizuku Kosumosu from day 13. I love this pairing. The pen looks so good with Kosumosu, and it just feels so juicy and so wet. It actually feathered a bit on this Tomoe River paper, but I don't even care because the writing experience is just so pleasant with this fountain pen. I really, really enjoyed that one. 2nd place goes to my Franklin Christoph Model 45 Lavender with a fine cursive italic nib. It was inked up with Pilot Iroshizuku Murasaki-shikibu from day 10. I just love my crisp italic style grinds, and so this was always a pleasant experience for me. One is a shocker for the second 30 inks in a row, but this is my Pilot Vintage Maki fountain pen with a script nib, and it has a black ink in there. Pilot Iroshizuku Takasumi from day 29. This was my favorite pen and ink pairing of the month. From all of this color, all of these wonderful pen and ink pairings, all of these options, I loved the black ink the most, the best. That was like the biggest shock of the month for me. But I cannot negate the wonderful experience that I had with this pen and ink pairing. It was just so good. It was so good. Now, the pen and inks that I would love to revisit, let's put these off to the side. So now that I have discussed the top 10 pen and ink pairings for the month of June, I would like to just reiterate those inks that I want to revisit sometime in the future. Yama-budo, where are you? Right here, that super duper wet brown ink. I would love to see this one in a drier fountain pen, or at least a fountain pen that's not super wet. Van Dieman's Kitten Paws. I would love to see it again in a broader nib. I just want to get a better understanding of this ink. So I would love to see it in a broader nib, something more expressive, and even a juicier nib to see if there are any more of those nice chromo shading properties that will come forward. Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyu-syogun, I would love to see that one in a thinner nib. So right here with this writing sample, I love how it looks, the crisp lines and everything. So I would love to see that type of writing in a fountain pen. Pilot Iroshizuku Hana Ikara, I would love to see this one with a thicker, broader nib to see if that would make a difference with the lightness of this ink. Okay, so the inks that I would like to remove from the box based on my experiences this month are illegible inks, just like last time from April, and straightforward orange and blue inks. So inks that look like this, inks that look like this, inks that look like that. I would probably be okay with removing them from my samples box because I know that I'm not really going to buy a full bottle of an ink that looks like this. I'm not going to buy a full bottle of ink that looks like that. Although I already have something that's similar to these. I have Aurora Turquoise because it came with one of my fountain pens, but I'm not going to go out and buy additional bottles of inks that look like this because they're not my favorite shade of ink. Inks that I would consider purchasing. So there are some runners up. Shin-ryoku, I like it just because it's in the Pilot Custom 823. Like, this was a wonderful writing experience, but I'm not too sure that I would actually buy the ink. Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyugaki is a wonderful writing experience as well, but just like Shin-ryoku, I don't know that I would actually buy the ink. I would just love to have these types of experiences with that Japanese extra fine nib. Murasaki-shikibu, I really do enjoy this ink, but I would love it if it was a cooler tone purple like Dieman Rainbow's End. Pilot Iroshizuku Seoro is a really gorgeous ink as well, but I already have Tasya Sabi Midori, which is very similar to this. I enjoy Sabi Midori a lot more than I enjoyed this one. Pilot Iroshizuku Suigyoku. I want to try this one in another fountain pen before I make a decision on whether or not I would buy a full bottle of this ink. It is gorgeous, but I'm not convinced that I would want a bottle just yet. Actual inks that I would really purchase. Van Diemen's Kitten Paws. I would absolutely purchase. Guess what? I actually did purchase that one. Pilot Iroshizuku Kosumosu, I'm probably going to purchase a bottle of this ink. Jacobin Henri de Birmanie, I would love to purchase an ink that looks exactly like this, but performs like an Iroshizuku ink. Pilot Iroshizuku Kitten, I would be very willing to purchase this ink. I think I would prefer to replace Fuyu-syogun with a bottle of Kitten. So yeah, if I could just like trade or swap with somebody, I would definitely enjoy Kitten. Pilot Iroshizuku Yama-budo, it's a gorgeous color. I love the color, I love the wetness, and I love how it paired so very well with my Benu fountain pen. I think I would love this with finer nibs. I would love it with broader nibs. It's just a gorgeous color. Pilot Iroshizuku Take-sumi would be my standard black ink that I would use in fountain pens where I need a black ink, but I don't want to put a permanent black ink in there. And so that would be my standard black that I would love to have in my collection. As of April 30th, my sample count was at 210. I brought in new samples from friends, from Inkflight, from other one-off purchases, which included the entire Iroshizuku line that I heavily featured this month. As of the end of June, my grand total is 227. So I went from 210 to 227. The overall number has increased, but it increased less than I thought it would since I brought in an unusual number of ink samples in the past couple months. I'll continue to use and pass along my ink samples at every opportunity. I'd like to do more ink comparisons on Instagram like I did with Van Diemen's Kitten Paws, and then pass along those samples as well. So through donations, more 30 inks sprints, and ink explorations, I hope that my sample stash will decrease overall this year. Now, as long as I don't make a habit of purchasing an entire line of inks like I did last month, I should accomplish that goal. Now, about getting behind schedule, because I was behind schedule. Some of you may have noticed that I was able to publish my 30 inks videos consistently for only the first 7 days of June. I could not maintain a consistent schedule because of illness. My kids' summer break started around that time, summer events and vacation, extended family visiting from out of state. Last month, I learned more about myself than I did about pens and inks. I tend to stick to the plan, even to my own detriment, and I learned that regular check-ins with myself can help me to remain focused on what's really important in my life. And I'm learning to be okay with giving my hobbies a break when they start to interfere with my priorities. I still want to continue participating in 30 inks 30 days challenges throughout the year, but I'll only be posting these daily writing samples to Instagram from now on. I still plan to film a final thoughts video at the end of each month that I participate, but the daily videos will cease for a bit. Eliminating the daily videos will grant me some margin for rest and other commitments in my life. So going back to the pairings specifically, overall, these experiences were phenomenal. I love that Iroshizuku inks worked well in just about any pen. The exception is that Kaweco that needs a little extra attention. But what do you think? What have your experiences been with Pilot Iroshizuku inks, with Van Diemen's inks, or Jacquardin inks? Would you have assigned different pens to these inks? And beyond the topic of pens and inks, what have you learned about yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for joining me on this journey. Now, if you would love to see additional 30 Inks 30 Days videos and you have not checked out my 30 Inks videos from April, you can go ahead and check that out. I have a playlist on my channel. I hope you all have a great day and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.